All right, it's Friday, November 29th. I'm going to shoot a video on this micro-strategy stock, MSTR, which this is the intraday chart right now, heading a little lower. Also, it's represented by MSTU, which is a little less leveraged version of it. So maybe I'll analyze this one here. It's really the same exact thing. And again, it's been the hot stock, for a few weeks now with the Bitcoin, boom. And you can see here on the monthly chart, it had a big run up, but then a big sell-off, which I'll get into in a minute. The weekly chart here, after kind of giving you some good opportunities to the upside, finally started red all week long here. It's been green, even with a big sell-off one day here. But, there's been good opportunities to buy it. But then once you see the, below the red open of the week, we've been kind of biased down all week. We'll see next week and next month what really unfolds here. That opening price action, next into December is going to be an important reference point both for the week and the month going forward. So we'll see if maybe, it starts green and heads back up, or does it stay red and follow through lower on this weekly chart down here. I think, given this just structure of this chart, it almost looks like one of those, pretty, what do you call it, like a parabolic rise that's more, selling off big, and that usually leads to a lot of consolidation and more day-to-day opportunities, I think, is the way to look at this one, because there's a lot of volatility, and that's going to be my theme, I think, in terms of an overall analysis of what's going on now. But we'll look, day to day here. This is the daily chart. Obviously, it's had the nice uptrend, and you had green, a couple of red, pullback days up. Then you finally had exhaustion risk. You were waiting for something to happen eventually, and you had the big sell-off here. And then, obviously, this was the first day where you kind of, this day did it too, where you came above the midpoint. You came above the high the previous day, then you got to the midpoint, so you kind of expected that low to be taken out. We did that, and we just kind of consolidated here on this little 3-bar, and that meant, once you couldn't follow through much lower to some of these gaps and you had the 2-up day, you're kind of working back up to that high. In this particular 3-bar, you don't see that. You kind of consolidated inside, you didn't test lower, and then you didn't get above the midpoint of that bar, and that's why it's not surprising at all you headed a little lower. And that's kind of the theme at the moment. We are heading down, even though there's some volatility and buying coming in at these lower prices. I still think, at the moment, we're heading lower and looking for the sell opportunities day to day on this one. Now, there could be some good buy opportunities. It's still kind of in an overall uptrend. So eventually you might get some kind of reversal to the upside, but you're going to have to wait for something to develop here that either fails and comes back up to a midpoint, or an inside bar failure down that comes up, or just a strong open, to give you a buy signal. So that hasn't developed yet ever since this big red bar. If anything, the few opportunities have been to the sell side on this one, and I'll show you that day to day real quickly. So that's what I see. That's going to be the final, analysis, is that it's too tricky given the weekly chart having such a big, volatile sell-off here with a red bar. It's too tricky to feel comfortable with the uptrend unfolding here until this chart gets more constructive. And yet with the big uptrend, I don't necessarily see a big failure yet either. That's not really unfolding, although it is red, and you almost expect that weekly red to be tested. But if we can't test that lower, then maybe into the December, we then get a nice, rebound to the upside. But we'll know where the opening price is in December to know if we're biased to the upside. So that's why you got to wait for that to unfold. But anyway, just going day to day here, just to show you why I think it's been more sell opportunities ever since that big red bar. Like I said, this 3-bar resolved to the upside. This 3-bar obviously wants to continue a little lower. So if you just go for these last 5 days since this red bar formed, I'll do it real quickly here on the 15-minute chart day by day. Once you saw that big red bar form, let me get my pointer here. This was on the 15-minute chart. Once you came back through the midpoint, you sold off quickly and came to the midpoint of that prior day. You expected that low to be tested out, and it did do that, and then it eventually rebounded a little bit, but then closed near the lows of the day pretty strongly. The next day, you did gap up, so, you had the broadening action. You didn't know for sure if you're going to maybe come all the way back up to new highs, given that it was just one day of a sell-off. You did have opening price action, which took out the first bar high and definitely moved higher, but it only got to the midpoint of the prior day. If you look at it here, this green bar, it never really took out, and once you see a big red bar, you kind of don't expect it to go all the way back up there, on maybe if we tested the lows first and then you came back through it, fine. But here you're just inside. So you're almost expecting it to fail at some point, even though the structure was up a little bit, early in the morning. Anyway, it eventually just had an inside bar, and you kind of saw you paused here, and you're kind of still monitoring the lows of that big red bar to be tested. And that's kind of what happened the next day. You had the opening price action heading lower. You only rebounded to the midpoint of that bar. early on. So there was actually a good sell signal here on this red, reversal to test the lows of the day, and that's kind of where it came close to getting. I don't think it quite hit the low, but at least from this bar on, it went lower most of the day. So now you're kind of closing near the lows. You expect that low to be tested. What happened here is you gapped down a little bit, and you did take out those lows right out of the gates, and that's why it was a little tricky. The very first move took out those lows, and then it got a little buying, but you're nowhere near the midpoint of the prior day. You're still biased down. So this little red reversal here, you kind of expected those lows to be taken out, and that's all that happened. And then you kind of moved a little bit lower. You had a little pullback to the midpoint of the first bar, and then another secondary push to new lows. So there was definitely a bias down here. You're below the midpoint of the prior day. Once you took out the first bar low, you kind of expected a downward bias, and you continued lower. So that's why the sell opportunities have been to the downside. Then you hit down here. You're kind of expecting that low to be taken out just because it's a red bar. You see some targets down here, and you get a little gap up on an inside bar. Again, nothing too exciting, in terms of buying it, even though you're gapping up a little bit the next day. And you can see here, no immediate follow through early, and then eventually it kind of moved lower, and then it didn't want to follow through all the way to the lows of the prior day, but it just kind of stayed inside all day long, and just a big inside nothing day. So, you're not excited to buy it. The downside didn't unfold, but you're still biased to the downside. Then today we gap up a little bit, and this is the interesting thing. Anytime I see an inside bar, I'm ready to, look for a failure potentially if you don't get a strong breakout. You would expect kind of that high to be tested, inside bar, there's your target. Yet you're below the open of the week at the moment with 1 day to go in the week, and it's not really exciting. You think you're going to close this weekly chart red, which could lead to lower next week. So, what happened today, if you really look at it, was that very first opening. Let me get to it here. Whoops. The very first bar here, you did see a pre-market high here, and you saw yesterday's high, that high from the prior day, 2 days ago up there. And that's why that very first bar, it did follow through and get to that point. So for a good 45 minutes, you did have upward price action. Not surprising at all to see this big red bar fail in here. You're still below the open of the week. On this, this is the daily chart, and, you're an inside bar that could easily fail. And once you saw that red bar hit, you just kind of sensed that you were just taking out stops up here. You were going to test the lows of the day, and now you're biased to the downside going lower. So this was, to me, even another good sell signal overall. And again, I'm not excited, even though I could see technically buying this one on bar 2, at least to take out that pre-market high and that inside bar high. That was a definite target, but I could picture a failure happening there. So I really want to see strong follow through and close that week with a nice, hammer bar to the upside. And instead, it immediately wanted to fail, and that was your sign to, stay down, downward bias today as well. And that's where we're heading here. And we probably have an hour to go in trading. So I get the feeling that we're going to close this week red. I look for lower tests, and then, until this gets more constructive to the upside on the weekly chart, I can't get too excited to the upside, and yet I don't know if it's going to fail. So to me, it's just like I was going through here. It's a day-to-day analysis, looking at the 15-minute chart, how it opens relative to, some of the expectations from the prior days and everything else. So that's, I guess, the big picture analysis here. At the moment, I'm still biased to the downside. I know on Monday or whatever it is, the first day of December, that's going to be a key reference point. That open, I want to see if the month, stays red and continues a little lower here. And until I get more constructive price action, I'm not going to get excited to the upside as well. So it's more day to day, and I think there'll be certain days going forward that are very clear, given what happened the prior day and where the weekly and monthly charts are kind of unfolding as to any good opportunities. But there's been a couple on these last 5 days where you kind of failed this inside bar here, and you kind of expected lower. This is a good sell, I think, failing this inside bar to the upside, heading lower. So I'm kind of looking for those kind of clues going forward, and I'll see if a good buy opportunity unfolds here with some price action that fails to the downside. But other than that, we're just going to have to watch and see day to day. That's kind of my big picture analysis on this thing, given the big sell-off that unfolded after kind of a parabolic rise to the upside.